Hitler therefore ordered the two leading motorcycle manufacturers, Z&DAPP and BMW, to design an extremely heavy sidecar machine for the most challenging conditions on the battlefield during the Second World War and at BMW. After 2 years of development, this resulted in the BMW R75, which came equipped with off-road and road gear reduction, sidecar drive, and hydraulic brakes. Look here, this is the accompanying book that was provided for this heavy machine. Let's listen to a beautiful pencil sketch on one of the first pages here. Berlin, 27.06. For 1 o'clock command of the Army. Army opener and Department for Development and Testing on behalf of HOLZHUER. Here is the construction of the motorcycle, the individual components and functions, all nicely labeled and numbered. The engine, and here you can see it very well on this R75 motorcycle, with slanted tie-downs and handlebars, different from the R12 where it was still a chain, and that was of course a huge advantage here as they last forever. Look how ingenious it is to be able to change the engine on this motorcycle. The frame of the R75 is assembled with many small tube connections, and can be easily unscrewed here, folded down, and then you can simply see the engine come out. So perfectly built actually. Here is another view of the frame. Also quite impressive gear cascades inside. Madness, technology that inspires. Here is a quick disassembly of the rear wheel, so you could quickly fold up the fender, which by the way was also the case with many motorcycles built at that time. They simply had a hinge at the back of the fender, and could then remove the wheel with a few simple steps. Here again is an overhead view. When sitting on top of the motorcycle looking down, you can see here the shift linkage and shift mechanism here indicating off-road. Road gear selection options as well as for gears, upshift and downshift, including reverse gear. The wiring diagram is very Spartan, just 4 or 5 lines, and that's how the entire motorcycle works. Here we have this switch box again in small form. All connections are listed right there. It's a fuse box combined with a distribution box mounted on the motorcycle. 2 go to rear lights, 3 go forward, 4 go downward, 2 brake light switches, 2 for battery power supply, making sure that everything electrically fits together on this motorcycle. I wanted to know about these wheels again. Is it really true that you could swap them on the BMW, right?
Unfortunately, only in theory. Often, it is true that they actually do not fit. They had different suppliers, or even manufactured them themselves, but to different tolerances. That's why sometimes it's actually the case that you have the same gear in your hand and want to install it. It doesn't work because it doesn't fit. This is due to the fact that each one has their own production and each one has built in their own tolerances. That's why sometimes, not always, but sometimes the parts actually don't fit.
Let's go into detail with your vehicle again. Here are 2 levers. That's the gear shift lever. It even says off-road and road on it. If you're not familiar with the vehicle, you can read it yourself. You have the lever here for the gear shift, and here you have the off-road gears. On the other one, it says first, second, third gear.
It must be very logical. Of course, one must have an additional lever for the off-road reduction. The other requirement was foot shifting and hand shifting back then, for whatever reason. It's also very practical to always see immediately which gear you're in. That's obviously an advantage as well. You need the additional lever for reverse gear. Therefore, it's more or less necessary.
Gear. Then you press the small button here. Here you also have locks for the differential.
In the first version, you could simply engage it. It often happened that while driving, your knee would hit against it and unintentionally engage the lock. That's why you can't engage it like that anymore. You have to pull it outwards.
Then they would just drive straight ahead. There's nothing you can do about it. You're just driving straight ahead. The exhaust still looks completely original.
The heat shield is original too. Both of them are old.
It looks good as well. With the leather bags, you can see that they are quite old. When kicking, then there are quick closures here.
There used to be a bracket here. I still have that at home too. That was also a replica. The modern hinges that are screwed onto the wood somewhere. The problem with the leather bag is that you can easily hit it with your heel. That's why the leather bag already has a hole in it. This is an early version. Here, there's a safety catch that can be quickly removed. That's the later version. Up here, there are some fancier embellishments with crescent rings, enameled and in brass.
The license plate is also original and was found in the box as well. Very nice. Here is the power switch on top. The emblems are also original, which is wonderful. The enameled emblems at BMW. How emblems used to be made earlier on. We saw one on the SID car as well.
Despite the war, the first ones were still beautifully enameled, sometimes then painted over. As the war progressed and more materials were needed, they were made of steel sheet metal instead and no longer enameled.
Today everything is made of plastic everywhere. You can see how proud people are of their motorcycles today. Then it crumbles away. They wouldn't have thought of that back then. What symbol do you have on the front?
I have drawn a tank destroyer emblem on it. Was it always like that? I am part of a historical association where we portray a tank destroyer unit, so that's why it's there.
So you're part of a group that maintains these things and drives together.
The association calls itself Panzerjet 128. It's not an official association, but more of a loose connection between people who collect such vehicles on one side and those with related items on the other side. They come together in this way. In Germany, it's not so common to do this on a large scale. It's about representing history accurately.
People don't appreciate the time period, but rather focus on the technology.
There are celebrations held in certain places commemorating liberation from German forces. If only Americans are seen walking around, it doesn't look good. This aspect is always included. Therefore, realism is important. There is a major event where only vehicles are displayed in spring. You can ride along. In autumn there is a combination of vehicles and soldiers which is very popular. Tickets sell out quickly with over 1,000 attendees.
People long for simple technology. It's not about war, but rather being fascinated by technology. Where did you start your journey?
I started in Bremen and headed towards the Elbe River. I camped for the first time in Wittenberg, then continued to Magdeburg until reaching a small campsite.
So you don't plan your route beforehand, but rather go wherever you feel like going.
Yes, I go wherever I want to go at that moment. Now I'm heading to the Harz Mountains, specifically to Badenhausen, where there will be 20 to 30 vehicles from that era at a gathering in the forest near a hiking lodge, which will be wonderful.
The sign here used to be a quick reference guide. You knew immediately how to care for it, where the lubrication points were. You can see it in old pictures.
For the people who had to drive such vehicles, or rather, were allowed to, it was a highlight to be able to ride such a motor. But there were certain requirements, the ability to handle the vehicle and maintenance. Naturally, they didn't dismantle the engine. Daily care, lubrication, and so on. These are small memories, but generally, they knew best themselves. They were trained rigorously so that it would work. Their lives depended on it back then.
Especially in some Vermacht images.
The motorcycle was like a good friend that you could rely on when it came down to life and death situations. That's how they behaved when they were out as scouts. It was intended as a combat device. In the early war years, they were supposed to drive towards the enemy and get as close as possible while the man in the sidecar jumped out with the machine gun, followed by the second man at the back. Then the driver was supposed to bring the vehicle to safety and engage in combat if necessary, but they quickly abandoned this tactic.
We have the old instruction manual. It's all written there. You can feel fear just reading about what they had to go through.
Unfortunately, it didn't help much.
We have wars again in Europe. 80 years later, we still can't reconcile our German position. We're cutting off ties with Russians for eternity. A tank or war vehicle has never brought peace. Motorcycles aren't responsible either. That's why I say we both stand for peace. I'm glad. I wish you lots of fun. Take care. Helge sets off for the Harz Mountains. How beautifully the machine starts up. The R75 from World War II.
Hier in wunderbarer Erhaltungszustand. Mach's gut!
Farewell. Simply wonderful.